Welcome to Therapy, Coaching, and Dreams. My name is Dee Kelly. I'm with Jim Shalley. It's good to be with you again, Jim.
Good to be with you again.
We are exploring so many different aspects of life using a model of personality that we reference as the STIR model, looking at 4 different personality types: stabilizer, the transformer, the initiator, and the responder. And we've made some reference periodically to issues that have to do with vocation. But I'd like to dig deep into this area of vocational trauma. I know that vocational issues are something you address regularly in your therapeutic practice. I certainly do with several clients in regard to coaching. But maybe it's probably good to start off with just a general description of vocational trauma. Trauma can come in a variety of ways vocationally. It can be because you're fired, or you've had a turnover in ownership of a company, or the organization itself is going through upheaval. It can be a change in job description. It can be a demotion. It can be major conflict in the workplace with fellow employees. So it can come in a lot of forms. But I think anybody who's been through a incredibly difficult scenario in their work life is familiar with the havoc that it can play in your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's also probably important to note, as you did before we got started, that it tends to be an issue for an age group that is into their career for a while, as opposed to just starting out in a career. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know when you first start out. So yeah, I would definitely think you really can't. It's like anything; you can't be aware of what you don't know until you know it, and so you never know the corporation you're working for or anything like that until you get into it. And yes, there's all kinds of different trauma that happens in the workplace, from the statistics that suggest the majority of people don't really enjoy their jobs, and so they just hang on to jobs. They feel like they're trapped, and they have to have health insurance. They have to have all kinds of benefits that they can't leave, so they feel trapped. So trauma can be very, very intense, or it can be pretty subtle as far as how you experience it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. You kind of allude to it in the comment you just made when you talk about health insurance and steady income. When something traumatic happens vocationally, where either there is a significant decrease in pay, you're forced to move from full-time to part-time, or you're forced out, you lose your job, the financial pressure creates all kinds of ripple effects, particularly if you have a family or there are others who are dependent upon your income. And that increases anxiety, stress levels exponentially, it seems to me.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
So one of the questions is, you've got kind of 3 ways to look at this. How do you prepare yourself ahead of time before something like that happens, which very few people do? How do you deal with the immediate stressor? And then what are some of the coping mechanisms that help you to manage long-term moving forward? So when somebody comes just in crisis, I mean, you can think about crisis in general, but specifically vocational crisis,
For
it
example,
is,
give me an example of what you might be talking about.
well, so in industry has experienced an upheaval. But let's talk something very current. AI has caused a great reduction in the workforce at where you're employed, and your job is either on the line or you've already been let go and been given, let's say, a severance package of 30 days or 2 months or something like that. And somebody comes to you and said, "I I don't know what to do. I don't have any other options. I don't know where to go." And it's like this.
Thanks for the real simple problem.
Great. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's really intense.
Yeah.
That seems.
And so what do you address first? Because it hits so many parts of life. How do you help somebody focus in on the next best step?
The first thing you have to assess is, were they expecting it on any level? Because the trauma is more intense, obviously, if it happens out of the blue where they didn't even expect it. And so you assess that initially. And lots of times they'll say, well, people talked about it, there was an inclination to it. And then occasionally there will be completely surprised, like, you know, somebody came in and bought the company and everybody was let go, or and that kind of shock, it's almost like dealing with sudden death in some ways. And that's always the hardest thing. And what are your options? So you have to really spend a lot of time just being with the individual and then trying to help them be so. I mean, the balance is sitting with it while not getting caught up in it and trying to process through the pain of it again without feeling like it's the rest of your life. So always you try to reframe it in some way that not right away, but at some point you start pointing out things that have survived, things that have happened to them to give them a context that life. But initially, it's just validating the incredible trauma, surprise, unfairness of it, however their emotions are experiencing it, to let them express those.
That's great, Jim. I think that in those moments, whether somebody puts these words to it or not, there is a feeling that you have lost control. You've lost control of the
Absolutely.
storyline. You've lost control of your destiny. You've lost control of things that you thought were stable and steady.
Yeah.
And so is not part of the journey to kind of methodically, I guess, begin to identify what they still control, like the things
Yeah. I
that you
mean,
can do in these
right.
moments.
Yeah. Exactly. You have to address something to break it down because a lot of times they're overwhelmed. How am I going to pay the bills? What's going to happen to the kids' insurance? All that stuff begins to kind of overwhelm you. So you have to break it down and say, okay, what can you control today? To your point. And, the other part of it is at some point when people finally kind of have a perspective at some point, most of the time they'll say, it's really interesting. We really have very little control in our lives, don't we? And that's the ultimate angst or existential crisis is realizing what really do we have control over? And of course we have control over some things to manage, but ultimately things can happen out of the blue that will set our course a different direction.
I think it comes back to something that you brought up in I think season one, but is the significant difference between what's called an external locus of control, where you think that everything is out there, to an internal locus of control, where you believe that nobody can take away my sense of self, nobody can destroy my identity. And there is, in moments like this, an internal locus of control seems to add to the recovery in a much more significant way than somebody who is being overwhelmed by the outward circumstances and what they can't do or can't control.
Which is a really a larger conversation, like, can you move someone from being externally locus
Mm.
of control to internal? I think you can, but I think and life almost always does that to it, as if we're growing and developing into a full human being, we take responsibility for the choices we make as best we can. And yeah, that's the internal, but if you're really an extrovert who just lives to please others or is just externally driven, that's pretty tough because the external circumstances dictate the quality of my life to some degree. And so to get them to understand that, wait a minute, what do you have control over? Well, the corporation did this, the boss did this. Then it's a fine line between that and going into a victimization or a victim mentality to where life just happens to me and I have no control. Which is why I think people do well if to seek some form of therapy or coaching to help them through that. 'Cause it's so easy to just to kind of, for lack of a better way of describing it, feel sorry for yourself and kind of wallow in it, as opposed to thinking, okay, wait a minute, I got to do something here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to become stagnant, to
Oh yeah,
give up and to kind of stop trying.
I have no control. So especially if, and this is a tough case, but especially if your spouse has a pretty decent job and you're just discouraged and you just kind of like, you know what? okay, we'll survive here. I'm just gonna like not worry. I'm not gonna focus on much right now because then it can become more of a lifestyle. Like, why would I try again? It's, again, depending on your age.
In that scenario, you then have one of the many ripple effects of vocational trauma, and that is that the tension that begins to exist within relationships where resentment can set in. You're not even trying, could be the
Absolutely,
viewpoint of a spouse.
absolutely, absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then that becomes another layer of conflict and pain and difficulty.
yeah.
Um,
Let's say I'm a guy who pretty a nice guy, pretty passive. Kind of fell into a job, pretty good job. I'm selling some stuff, and it's going pretty well. And but I'm not passionate about it. It's just something I do, and then I lose my job. I lose the job, and I'm now 52 or 53, and my wife has a pretty good job. And I'm thinking, I don't want to work. And yeah, that can absolutely cause great stress because he's not going to admit that. Number one, probably. But the movement would suggest he's kind of comfortable, and I didn't really like my job anyway, and I'm kind of relieved. And now I'm just out, cutting grass and hav having a good time, which isn't a good or bad. I'm just saying, to your point, depending on the spouse, the wife could become, "Well, you're not gonna work again?" "Well, yeah, no, I'll work again." Yeah. So it can cause a lot of, and again, that exposes the expectations of any relationship, and that's really what trauma does.
yeah. Yeah. Again, this is something that we've mentioned, but maybe not in this context. And that is where we find our identity. I think very often the masculine side of an individual doesn't necessarily need to be male or female, but the masculine side of an individual often goes down the pathway of connecting their identity to what they do,
Mhm.
because the masculine side is task driven.
Right.
And so I am what I produce, or I am what my vocation is.
Mhm.
And so if there is some type of vocational situation where what you do is removed from you,
Mhm.
there is not simply a financial crisis, but there's an identity crisis. Like, who am I then?
Mhm.
And then that poses an entirely different pathway of discovery or struggle as you
Well,
try and
yeah.
figure out who you are in the midst of that.
Yeah, the taking that all the way to a to the extreme, it would be like, let's say, the feminine, the woman typically has a really good job, making pretty good money, but they really don't wanna do that. And now we have a man who lost his job, who I need to get in the more feminine mode of realizing the relationships are really important. So now you have you flipped everything. He's in a role that he doesn't like, and she's in a role she doesn't like, and yet they can't talk about it. So you have a really tough relationship because she's basically saying, "Well, get a job." And he's saying, "I kinda just wanna stay home and raise the kids." And it's like, "Oh, okay, how do we do this?" Yeah, so those emotional role reversals are really challenging. It's again, especially if the man is defined that way and loses his job and doesn't wanna be redefined as relationally driven and take care of the kids, but he's also discouraged and he's has a tough time finding a job. Then you have a wife who's working but doesn't really want to be working, wants to be home with the kid. Yeah, there's all kinds of different dynamics in relationships that cause, from my perspective, and I think yours as well, an opportunity. This is going to sound like psychobabble, but it's an opportunity to really discover who I am.
Mm.
And I think that's where if you can get someone to begin to see that the journey of life is larger than the job, larger than raising kids or whatever. It's about self-discovery. Then you think, "Okay, well, I thought I'd have this job forever, and now I don't. Well, who am I? What am I? Yeah, yeah, what do I do?" Very very traumatic in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. I also think it leads to a very simple conversation that certainly has some complicated outgrowths of it, but that everyone does things they don't like to do so that they can have an opportunity to do the things they do like to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you had a job you loved and you lost it, okay, I get it. That's traumatic. But sometimes the answer is not waiting for 5 years till you can find a job that you love so much, but is to do something that maybe is not your favorite, but solves several of the tension, difficult problems that you face, financial or relationally, so that you can continue to do some of the things that you love and rediscover an identity that is something different than a vocational identity.
Mhm.
It may be that a vocational identity comes back and becomes important once again, which is great. That happens for some people, but it doesn't happen for everyone.
Mhm. It's true. It does. It can, like any trauma, it's how you respond to it. And does it open you up to a broader life, or does it shut you down to more restrictive things? And I think that's why it's so important to process the trauma. I saw a clip last night where one of the best questions you can ask when you're dating someone is to have them describe their worst trauma that they're comfortable with sharing, how they've responded to it, and how it affects their interactions with others. It's like, okay, that's that on the first date.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's a little personal, isn't it?
Yeah. How'd that go?
But but the point being, at some point, yeah, that's a great question to see how aware you are of how things are affecting you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because those moments form you, and to hear the story of what you did with that trauma tells a whole lot about a person and whether you're compatible.
yeah,
That's a great
absolutely,
question.
absolutely true. Yeah. Mhm. The other thing too that I remember, I think the former CEO of General Electric 100 years ago wrote a book, and in that book, he basically said, "One of the best gifts I can give you is to fire you from a job you're not suited for." Because it does
Mm,
exactly what you say. It opens someone up then to maybe pursue something that's more compatible. But easy for him to say it. If it
yeah,
happens to you, it's like, "Whoa." And I think I've worked with some people that have been relieved that they got let go because of the very thing they couldn't do it themselves, but it did give them permission to do something different. Again, the response is classic. It's common sense, but it's how you respond to those things that are so important.
yeah. It's often when people look back years later and say, "Yeah, it was very difficult, but it was so helpful to where I ended up being."
Yeah, so true. You can't see it at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably
And
not.
you don't wanna say that too soon as a coach or a therapist.
That's exactly what I was about to say. You might want to avoid commenting about that until several years have passed.
Yeah. They come in the first session, you go, "No, I think it's a good thing. I think it was a good thing."
Though I will say that there are times that I am thinking that when I'm working with somebody, knowing what a horrible fit the job was, or the many times we talked about how difficult the work environment was, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, this is the opportunity you've been waiting for, but we can't talk about that yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely true. Yep. Mhm.
That's it for part one of this two-part series on vocational trauma. Please join us in the next episode for part two. Until then, keep growing, stay curious, and take good care of yourself.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff.